evening, everyone. I just wanted to let everyone know beforehand that this webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions, there is a chat option in Teams with the little conversation bubble. Feel free to put any messages that you might have into there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening for the Sigma Tau Gamma Tax Compliance webinar. My name is Steve Lenevy. I am a tax senior manager here in the St. Louis office and have been working on the Sigma Tau Gamma engagement for, I believe, 6 years now. I'm joined with Brittany Pfeiffer. Brittany, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, I am a tax manager here in the St. Louis office, St. Louis BDO office. I'm working in core tax services.
Thank you, Brittany. And for all of you that are joining us today, the day-to-day interaction that you'll have with our team here on the BDO side will be largely conducted through Brittany. So you'll be talking with Brittany quite a bit, and any questions that you have, if you send those to the stgchapters@bdo.com email, Brittany may be the one responding to you through there. So without further ado, let's get started. So what we're going to be covering today is largely that tax organizer that was sent over, but we're also going to touch on a couple of other things. So you're going to understand the importance of tax reporting for your chapter. We're going to learn how and why to maintain accurate records for tax purposes. Brittany's going to walk through being able to complete an accurate organizer. We have changed up the organizer this year to make things a little easier for both the chapters, for your national fraternity, and then for us on the BDO side as well to help streamline that return process. We're also going to discuss some accounting best practices, familiarize you with other tax requirements that your chapter might have, and then understand the 2020 tax compliance timeline. And the reason that we call it the 2020 tax compliance timeline, even though it is 2021, is that as your chapter's fiscal year ends in 7 days, the tax compliance year that year it corresponds to is the 2020 tax year. So diving right in, a couple of tax requirements for Sigma Tau Gamma chapters themselves. You are required by your national organization to maintain accurate records to support tax reporting. And so what this means is that your books and records, the information that you're keeping in Omega Phi, as well as if your chapter has an external account, all of that has to be maintained and meticulously so month by month, because you will need that information for your financial reporting. Your chapter is also required to annually file required forms 990, 990T, and any state filings. Your fiscal year end is June 30th, and the returns are initially due on November 15th. You'll also be required to annually file forms 1096 and associated forms 1099. Those are determined on a calendar year basis, and those returns are due January 31st. We talk a little bit about those filings a little later on in the presentation. Now, again, to really drive this point home, Sigma Tau Gamma requires all chapters to meet these requirements. If at the end of the presentation you have any additional questions about these requirements, or if you don't know if your chapter might apply, feel free to reach out to us or to National. So, what records should a chapter maintain? Well, maintaining these records to support tax reporting, your chapter should maintain records both monthly as needed, but then also a couple of things that you'll annually keep as well. Monthly, you'll want to keep any documentation that you have related to your bank statements and bank reconciliations for any external accounts that you might have. Now, while chapters by and large aren't supposed to have external statements, to the extent that your chapter does, you should be reconciling the activity within these accounts monthly. And the reason that is so important is because you're going to want to track the categories of all of those activities, all the transactions that are flowing through those accounts, because we're going to need that for tax reporting purposes, but you'll also need that for your other reporting purposes as well. As you'll see in this year's organizer, that information, there is a specific section for that external account information that you're going to need to include that information on. You'll also want to keep record of any security deposits maintained by the chapter itself. And then, much like with your external accounts, you'll want to look at Omega Phi regularly and reconcile all of the activity going on in Omega Phi as well, both on the expense and revenue side. You'll find that if you do this piecemeal throughout the year, it becomes much easier than trying to figure out what happened 11 months ago, and trying to really reconstruct things that at this point feel like it might as well be in another decade. The records that you should maintain as needed are those records germane to any fundraising activities that you might have. Now, it's important to distinguish in fundraising activities. You have to separate out money received from members and money received from non-members. And members will include current and alumni members, but also family of members as well. Your non-member income is going to be anything other than that. You're going to want to keep that information because that non-member income may be unrelated business taxable income to your chapter. So it really is important here for any fundraising events that you might have. You're going to want to be vigilant about record keeping here for the money that's coming in and also the money that's going out. Not only the fundraising expenses that you're going to have, but what ultimately happens with those funds that are raised, whether you're donating that money to charity or whether you're using that money for chapter activities. That's going to be important for tax reporting purposes. You're also going to want to keep track of a deposit listing to see where that money, when the chapter brings the money in itself, and to the extent that it is depositing that money into its chapter account, you're going to want to keep record of that. You'll also, as needed, want to gather W-9s for vendors that you might use. If the chapter is using any vendors, or if it's using, for example, if it has an event and it hires a DJ, you're going to want to get that W-9 information for their payment because you may be required to provide them a Form 1099 at the end of the year. What the W-9 provides is the information that you'll need for reporting on that 1099. It's going to have their name, their address, their tax identification number, whether that's an employer identification number or a social security number. And we'll need all of that, or your chapter will need all of that for 1099 reporting. I will say, rule of thumb here is to get that W-9 filled out by the vendor prior to providing payment to them. It's much easier to get that info before you pay them, as you might imagine. And then annually, you want to keep a list of officers because you'll also need to report this on your 990. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Brittany and she'll be discussing the organizer.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. Now to dive into the tax organizer itself. Every chapter, as Steve mentioned, is required to complete and submit the tax organizer to BDO in order to timely file each chapter's tax return. The compliance period for the 2020 tax year is July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. These are the dates you should keep in mind when completing the tax organizer. The organizer consists of 6 tabs: the Introduction tab, General tab, Officers, Fundraising Information, Foreign Information, Income Statement, and Balance Sheet tabs. Within these tabs, there are several formula-driven cells. Please do not change or update any formulas within the Excel document. Additionally, the more time you focus on completing the tax organizer initially during preparation, the less time you'll spend overall. All tabs must be completed prior to submission, and upon incomplete status, we will return the organizer to you for full completion. So to kick it off, the Introduction tab lists the chapter's name and compliance period. Please update the STG chapter with your respective chapter name, You providing that information on the introduction tab is actually very helpful to us when we're receiving multiple organizers as the deadline approaches. The introduction tab also provides you with your BDO contact information and the email you will use to send us your completed tax organizer. As Steve mentioned, stgchapters@bdo.com is the email you will use to send us the organizer, as well as any additional questions you may have. Upon submitting the tax organizer, you can email us the Excel document as an attachment. The Excel format is the preferred method for submission, as it is the format you will receive it in. Also, please note, we cannot view files through Google Drive. So again, please send us your tax organizer via email attachment, preferably in Excel, to the stgchapters@bdo.com email. Also note on the right side of the tab, you will find the organizer completion summary. Currently, the tabs in the tax organizer are marked incomplete. As you prepare each tab of the tax organizer, the completion summary will mark each corresponding tab as completed. All 6 tabs must show completed prior to submission. Upon submission, if there is a tab indicating incomplete, we will return the tax organizer to the chapter. The chapter's tax organizer is not considered turned in to BDO until a complete and accurate tax organizer has been prepared. And with that, we will start with the first tab of the organizer, the General tab. The first piece of information on the General tab is the address of the chapter house, or the best mailing address for the chapter, as the address listed will be used on the tax return. When the tax returns have been completed, the Director of Finance will sign the 2020 tax return. The chapter representative for questions is the Director of Finance. Please do provide a phone number where the Director of Finance can be reached. We will most likely communicate via email, but we would like to have another means of contacting the Director of Finance if needed. Also note on the right-hand side the completion confirmation. In addition to the summary confirmation on the introduction tab, there is also completion confirmations on each individual tab. Please check to confirm completion upon finishing each tab, as this provides a quick confirmation whether or not you may have missed a question or an item requested. Next, the tax information request section consists of 14 questions, and each question should be answered. There may appear to be a lot of similar questions, but it is very important that each question is answered. Question number 1 relates to the chapter's annual gross receipts. If the chapter's annual gross receipts are below $50,000 on average over the last 3 tax years, this can help determine the 990 form required to be filed. You can reference your prior year tax returns as well as Omega Phi to determine the chapter's gross receipts. Question number 2. This relates to bank reconciliations and bank statements. It is mandated by National that each chapter utilize Omega Phi for its financial and banking needs, but we do understand that there are some chapters that have not yet made that transition. If your chapter is one of these chapters, it is of utmost importance that we receive both the Omega Phi and external bank account reconciliations through the June 30th year end and receive copies of any monthly external bank statements. It is important for the cash accounts, whether they are an Omega Phi or an external checking, savings, CD, money market account. It's important for those accounts to be reconciled and match the bank statement Omega Phi balance so that the true account balance is accurately reported on the tax return. We request the entire fiscal year of bank statements upfront so that if by chance there are any discrepancies with the bank reconciliations, we have easy access to each monthly statement and can resolve the issue faster than having to request additional statements from the chapter on a one-off basis. For any chapters that have a bank account that runs on a mid-month cycle and the statements have an ending date in the middle of the month as opposed to the end of the month, we will need the bank statements and bank reconciliations through mid-July so we can capture the account balance as of June 30th, because ultimately the balance as of June 30th is reported on the tax return. So if you do have a mid-month bank statement, please go ahead and send us the July statement as well. Questions 3 and 4. These relate to other tabs in the organizer, which we will discuss in full detail later. Question number 5 relates to any non-cash donations received. So we ask a similar question on the fundraising information tab regarding non-cash donations. This question, number 5 on the general tab, however, relates to any non-cash donations received from events held such as recruitment, bid day, and social events that are not affiliated to a fundraising event. Any non-cash donations received outside of fundraising activity would be listed here on the general tab. If the chapter receives any donated items such as food, supplies, or rental facilities at no cost or below the fair market value of the item, please list the date of donation, the description of the item received, and the estimated value of the donation. So some examples would include food purchased or donated by an alumni club, or potentially items donated from the fraternity to new chapters. Depending on the amount of the donation or multiple donations, this may be reported on the tax return. And just to reiterate, the non-cash donations received outside of a fundraising activity would be reported here in the tax organizer. Non-cash donations received for a fundraising activity will be reported within the fundraising tab of the tax organizer. Questions 6 through 7. For these items, we just need to know if the chapter still owes any rent or house fund fees as of June 30th. Most chapters do not have any outstanding rent or house fund fees due at fiscal year end. If your chapter does, we just need to know this amount so we can account for this expense and report it on the tax return. So now as we move to the bottom half of the tab, these questions toward the bottom are most often missed. All of these remaining questions must be answered in order for the tax organizer to be considered complete. Question number 8. This question relates to any long-term commitments the chapter may have that would need to be reported as a liability on the tax return. Most chapters do not need to have a liability recorded, but we'd like to be aware of any multi-year pledges to the foundation or multi-year contracts the chapter may have committed to. And some examples include multi-year contracts with a vendor for composites and a possible Xerox copy machine that the chapter releases. So please just disclose any that pertain to your chapter or check the box no if this does not apply. Question number 9 refers to any major furniture or fixtures purchased over $250 that the chapter may have purchased. Please list any major purchases made so we may move them to the appropriate account for the tax return presentation. Most likely this will not apply, as all large purchases of furniture or fixtures should be purchased by the housing manager. Question number 10. This question is just to remind you to keep copies of the prior year and current year tax returns, and that if anyone asks to see them, you must provide them a copy. So please check the box yes if your chapter is in compliance with this requirement. Question number 11 is also to remind you that anytime you are asking for money, that you must say that the donation is not tax deductible unless the donor is giving the money directly to the foundation. If the donor writes the check to the Sigma Tau Gamma Foundation, it is tax deductible to the donor. If the donor writes the check to the chapter, and then the chapter donates the money to the foundation, it is not tax deductible to the donor. So that difference is very important. If the donor writes the check to the chapter, not the foundation, it is not tax deductible to the donor. Question number 12. There's usually some confusion regarding this item as well. So this question asks if the chapter received any contributions during the fiscal year that the contributor has the right to restrict or direct the use of the funds. This is not referring to people giving money towards a fundraiser. This is when someone gives money to the chapter that they could potentially take back if it is not being used in the way the donor requested. So most likely this will be answered no for most chapters. Feel free to contact us if you think your chapter is in this situation though. Question number 13. Please just provide the number of members the chapter held as of June 30th, 2021. Question number 14. How many volunteers the chapter had for the fiscal year? A quick reminder when counting volunteers is that in most cases, every member of the chapter should be included as a volunteer, as well as financial advisors, alumni advisors, and regional specialists. And with that, we have completed the general tab. We do request that before moving on to the next tab, I would refer to the top to ensure that the current tab is now marked complete. And real quick, we'll stop to see if we have any questions in the chat.
That says, if the address of the chapter house will be different as of next semester, should we send the returns to the new address or my home address? And I think the best answer for that is if the chapter anticipates that its filing will be completed in the fall, send it to the best address to use for that time. So during that fall semester.
All right, moving to the Officers tab. On this tab, we request the name and title of each officer during the fall and spring semester. Please provide the hours per week devoted to the position as well. The hours devoted can be a rough estimate. The name, title, and hours devoted per week are all reported on the tax return, so all information is required. Okay, so moving on to the fundraising tab. This is the most important part of the tax organizer and sometimes can be the most challenging. This is where Steve mentioned maintaining accurate records for reporting will come in handy, and you'll be thankful you took the time to do so as a chapter. Initially, the fundraising tab looks pretty easy. You only have 3 questions. Question number 1, did the chapter have any fundraising events in which non-members took part in the event? Check yes or no. If you mark no on question number 1, then question number 2 confirms no non-member activity. If you did not have non-member activity, check the box to confirm so, and if that is correct, you held no fundraising activities with non-members, then you are finished with the fundraising tab. On the other hand, if you held events with non-members, you select yes on question number 1 and go directly to question number 3. Question number 3, how many events were held in which non-members attended? If you did hold fundraising events where non-members participated, you input the number of events held. And notice the fundraising tab is solely focused on non-member income. So let's briefly review the distinction between member versus non-member income. Individuals and businesses not related to the chapter, including other students and other fraternal and Greek organizations, are deemed non-members. So this distinction is important because this income could potentially be taxable to the chapter as UBI, unrelated business income. Member income includes yourselves as members of the chapter, any alumni, alumni clubs, as well as your immediate family members. So again, you only need to include events in which non-members participated. This would often mean that a fundraiser held on a mom, dad, or parents weekend event would not be included because parents of members are considered members for tax purposes. Another frequent event we see is a percentage of sales event. So this is a fundraiser where the chapter receives a percentage of a restaurant's sales for the day or time frame. You do need to include events where the chapter partnered with a business for a percentage of the proceeds when the business wrote the check to the chapter. However, you would not include these types of events if the business or non-member wrote the donation check directly to the foundation or other qualified charity of your choice. You would only include fundraising events within the fundraising tab if the check was made payable to the chapter and the chapter later writes their own contribution check. We also want to take a moment to discuss popular sites such as CrowdChange and mobile payment service options such as Venmo or PayPal. Starting with CrowdChange. So essentially it's an intermediary and any money raised in CrowdChange is not under the ownership of the chapter. So essentially, if the money raised in crowd change is directly donated to a qualified charity, such as Special Olympics, this transaction is not attributable to chapter activity. So think of it in terms that the money raised was never in the chapter's bank account, thus it's not reported by the chapter. On the other hand, if somewhere in the process of raising money on crowd change and the money raised is included in the chapter's bank account, then the funds need to be reported by the chapter on the fundraising information tab. Mobile payment services such as Venmo or PayPal. If you are utilizing any form of mobile payment during a fundraiser or any event held by the chapter, the account should be in the chapter's name and authority. The chapter should never be using a personal member's individual account for a chapter-hosted event. Okay, so now that we determined our streams of income, we've identified the chapter-held fundraising events in which non-members participated. You will need to fill out each fundraiser column completely for each fundraising event held by the chapter. So to start, please include the name of the fundraiser, the date of the fundraiser was held, or range of dates if applicable. And then the top section is a summary of gross revenue received by the chapter broken into 3 categories: non-member income, cash donations from non-members, and non-cash donations from non-members. Upon inputting the stream of income into the corresponding categories, the gross revenue by fundraising event will populate. In regards to cash donations, a cash donation is money received by those who do not want to participate in the fundraiser, but still want to give money to the chapter. Non-cash donations given for an event by non-members is also important to track. The IRS requires us to report any non-cash donations received, so please provide a description of each non-cash item donated, and this could be food, prizes, etc., and also include the estimated value of the donated item. Additionally, this is what I referenced earlier regarding non-cash donations for fundraising events. Here in the fundraising tab is where you state non-cash donations received from fundraising events, whereas non-cash donations received outside of a fundraising event are listed on the general tab. Furthermore, in some instances, a business or individual will donate an amount greater than $1,000. This can be a cash or a non-cash donation, and if this happens, the IRS requires us to report the name, address, and amount of the donation. So it is important for the chapter to keep sufficient records in the event a donation of this size is received, as it is reported on the tax return. Next, please list any fundraising expenses incurred by the chapter or incurred by activity, and the input should be entered as a negative for the formulas to be accurate. So as Steve mentioned, it is very important to track your fundraising expenses because these expenses will help reduce any taxable income. It is helpful to reference Omega Phi or any fundraising records kept while filling out this portion of the tax organizer. It's also helpful when recording expenses in Omega Phi to use the memo line for the check to provide a description of what the expense relates to. Because as you can see, you will break out any and all income received and expenses incurred per fundraising activity. So then the spreadsheet provides a breakout by net income per event and net fundraising income per event. The next section identifies the contributions paid, previously paid, or to be paid by the chapter, as well as any funds retained by the chapter for chapter activities. Although we advise for all money to be deposited as soon as possible, there may be times when amounts are not deposited by June 30th. If any deposits will be made after June 30th that are related to fundraisers from the fiscal year, we ask that you provide the amount deposited and the date it was deposited or will be deposited within the contribution payable section. This allows us to record a receivable for this money and accurately report the fundraising income for the fiscal year. We strongly encourage the chapter to pay any outstanding contributions within 90 days of year end. So as soon as you all return to campus in the fall, please keep in mind of any outstanding contributions to be paid that are identified while preparing the tax organizer. Please note that you can also indicate whether the funds will not be donated, but rather retained by the chapter for chapter activities. The net remaining from fundraising events or donation groupings row should be zeros, and OK should be populated to ensure accurate preparation. Ultimately, all transactions need to be accounted for. So the fundraising income received, fundraising expense incurred, charitable contributions paid or to be paid, or funds identified that will be retained by the chapter for chapter activity. And with that quick overview, let's go over a brief example to make it full circle. The current chapter held 3 fundraising events in which non-members participated. The name of the event and dates are populated, and the income and expenses are reported for each activity. Event number 1, the chapter incurred $200 from non-members, $100 in cash donations, in which the chapter received money but the donor did not participate, as well as $200 in non-cash donations consisting of food and prizes. We end up with $500 in gross revenue and incurred $100 in fundraising expenses, resulting in $400 of aggregate net income, and $100 in net income upon factoring solely non-member income excluding any donation, cash and not cash. So upon determining our net income per the event, for event number 1, we had $400 in net fundraising income, and we planned for the profit to be donated to our charitable cause, such as Special Olympics. The chapter has wrote the check to Special Olympics for this event prior to the close of the fiscal year, so we include in the total amount paid section. And our income and expenses net to zero, and the OK signified we tie out for event number 1. For event number 2, we have non-member income in the amount of $500 and incurred $200 in fundraising expense, resulting in net income of $300. The chapter is aware they have not wrote a check to Special Olympics as of June 30th, but intend to do so in the near future, so they have identified a contribution payable in the amount of $300. Again, our income and expense net to zero, and the OK signifies we tie out for event number 2. For event number 3, same criteria as event number 2, with net income of $300. Upon searching chapter records, the chapter identified a paid donation of $150. So we input that paid donation into our spreadsheet, and we can now identify $150 from the fundraiser that is not currently accounted for. Per the reconciliation, the chapter is now aware that they have an outstanding contribution payable in the amount of $150 that is to be payable in the near future, or the chapter intends to retain the funds for its own use. So in order to update the error in the spreadsheet, the $150 would need to be identified as an additional contribution payable or the amount retained by the chapter. And lastly, feel free to include any comments that you may have about the fundraiser. Explanations regarding deposits, expenses, and charitable contributions that help us match amounts up in Omega Phi are very helpful to us. Also, please note that any fundraisers hosted by the fraternity for members or a non-charitable purpose are potentially taxable to the organization. And with that, the fundraising tab is complete. Would we like to discuss any of the questions in the chat with the group?
Yeah, so there are 2 items there. One of the questions, if the brothers pay half of the cost of the event by Venmoing it to the chapter's account, would the chapter need to report this? The answer is that's correct. To the extent any fees or any monies hits the chapter's account, it must be recorded. Second question, if the chapter is holding a percentage event this month where it gets a percentage of sales from a restaurant, for example, but it does not receive the money until after June 30th, would we report that for this year or on next year's report? We would include this information on this year's report, if only for the recency effect as well, and being able to have that information on hand. And then for those funds, if you haven't yet received them, you would indicate a receivable on the balance sheet tab. And those were all the questions.
All right, fantastic. Moving to our foreign information tab. For the foreign information tab, we are confirming your extent of foreign activity, which likely the chapter will not have any foreign activity. The reason for the inclusion of this tab is that in recent years, the IRS has increased compliance for foreign reporting. The IRS wants to know if the chapter has any financial activity outside of the United States. So this includes any contributions made outside of the US or any foreign bank account the chapter may have outside of the US. So most likely the answer will be no, so you can check the box highlighted at the top in yellow. However, if you think you might have any form of foreign activity, please do reach out to us. So the next two tabs are also very important. The income statement and the balance sheet tab must be completed in its entirety. And if the tabs are not completed, we will send you the tax organizer back as incomplete. Ultimately, we cannot fill in the dots for you, as it is the chapter's responsibility to provide the financial information requested. As you can see, at the top of the income statement tab and balance sheet tab, we provided step-by-step instructions on how to pull the Omega 5 reports to assist you in completing both tabs. For the income statement tab, you'll log into Omega 5, find your chapter through Vault, select the accounting tab, and choose the income statement. This next slide shows you exactly what inputs are needed to generate the report you will use to complete the income statement tab in the organizer for the fiscal year reporting period. You will use this income statement detail report to fill out the income statement tab with Omega 5 detail on the organizer. And as mentioned before, your complete and accurate reporting will definitely come in handy for these next two sections. The Omega 5 report will be used to populate the income statement tab. And upon reviewing your Omega 5 detail, if you notice that something was coded incorrectly in Omega 5, you can always make those edits on the Excel organizer accordingly. So starting with revenue. So please note the format for the year has been updated to separately identify activity recorded in Omega 5 and activity from an external account not reflected in Omega 5. For those chapters that utilize Omega 5 only and do not hold an external account, please disregard the external account column. So for the revenue section, you will report your membership dues for the year. The contributions received outside of a fundraising activity will also be reported here. Your overall fundraising for the year is also summarized on the income statement. The income statement activity summary includes all member and non-member income received. If you were required to fill out the fundraising tab due to having non-member income, the fundraising tab information will directly relate to what is also summarized on the income statement. Additionally, please include any investment income the chapter received and provide detail regarding any additional miscellaneous income the chapter received. Please note, if you have external bank accounts with activity not recorded in Omega 5, you will need to review your bank statement activity to determine what is included on the income statement and balance sheet. In order for the income statement and balance sheet to tie, the complete activity from Omega 5 and your external bank account must be included. So this reconciliation is why it's so important to do those monthly bank recs and record the monthly activity for the chapter. It is a lot easier to identify and find those discrepancies when you are reconciling monthly. In regards to recording expenses, your grants and contributions would be any charitable contributions the chapter made to a qualifying organization during the year. Expenses are broken out on the tax return, so please identify and list the expenses incurred into the correct line. Again, if you notice something was coded incorrectly in Omega 5 or have external bank account activity, you can make those edits on the Excel organizer accordingly. Upon completing the revenue and expense section, your net income will automatically generate. Your net income is your total revenue minus your total expenses, and the net income reported on the income statement tab is directly pulled to the balance sheet tab, as we will see shortly. On to the balance sheet. The balance sheet reports the chapter's assets, liabilities, and net assets. So the balance sheet items are reported as of the fiscal year end date of June 30th, 2021. Once again, instructions are provided on the balance sheet tab of how to pull the requested information. You'll log into OmegaFi, find the chapter through Vault, select the Accounting tab, and click the Account Registers link. You will select each active account and pull the July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021 activity for each account. The cumulative cash balance of all accounts as of June 30th, 2021 will then be reported on the cash line of the balance sheet tab. So if the chapter has an external bank account that is not tracked in OmegaFi, the balances as of June 30th, 2021 will have to be added to the cash line as well in the external account column. And all external bank statements must also be sent to BDO for the fiscal year as mentioned. Most chapters will only have cash to report on the balance sheet, but please do indicate if the chapter holds any investments, accounts receivable, equipment, accounts payable, and of course we will follow up and discuss. As mentioned before, the net income is directly pulled from the income statement tab. For the unrestricted net assets, this can be found on the chapter's prior year tax return, which is uploaded to Vault for your reference. For chapters who filed a Form 990 in the prior year, you will reference Part 11, line 10. For Form 990EZ, you will reference Part 2, line 27. And for those chapters that filed a Form 990N, financial data is not reported on the 990N postcard. To determine your chapter's net assets, please utilize OmegaFi and your external bank statements to find the ending balance as of June 30th, 2021 for all outstanding bank accounts. Again, the aggregate balance of all outstanding accounts will be the chapter's beginning net assets for the year. Your total assets and your total liabilities plus equity should be the same. So as seen on the example slide, in the total column, our total assets equal 11,000 and our total liabilities plus equity also equals 11,000. And with that, the tax organizer is completed. Please double check that each individual tab indicates complete status and that the tax organizer is ready to submit. If any tab indicates incomplete, please identify and resolve prior to submission. Steve, do we also have any questions regarding the financial data for the income statement or balance sheet?
So there are no questions in the chat right now.
All right, well then we'll go ahead and move on to a few helpful OmegaFi navigation tips. So again, definitely reference the instructions in the tax organizer for pulling the income statement and balance sheet reports. Please report all complete and accurate information on the tax organizer for the fiscal year. OmegaFi should reflect the full activity of the year for the chapter, but as mentioned, if something were to be coded wrong or the chapter has external activity, please report all categorized activity on the tax organizer. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to National or BDO. Chapter accounting best practices, things to make your life easier. So if you guys haven't got the drift yet, OmegaFi reconciliations. The only way to ensure complete and accurate, or a great way to ensure complete and accurate maintaining of records, is that we advise monthly chapter reconciliations to OmegaFi. Ensuring expense categorization is correct and making note of any discrepancies will definitely come in handy, now when you all are having to prepare this tax organizer for the last 12 months. If you have any questions regarding discrepancies, again, feel free to reach out to BDO or National for guidance. We are always here to help. And just to reiterate, member versus non-member receipt tracking. Please be reminded while holding fundraising activities to track that member versus non-member income. Member income includes current members, alumni, and immediate family members. And after going through the fundraising tab, as well as the income statement tab and balance sheet reporting, you can see the importance of tracking the activity in its entirety. Because then at the end of the year, when we send out the tax organizer, you guys will definitely be ahead of the game, and filling out the tax organizer will be pain-free, which is our goal. External account consolidation. So it is National's policy to close any external accounts into your OmegaFi accounts. Having all activity maintained and recorded in Omega Phi will make it easier to track chapter activity, as mentioned, and one less step for you guys when regarding gathering your financial activity, your financial data. If you are unable to close your external accounts, do make BDO aware of its existence as soon as possible, as there is additional requirements for external accounts, as mentioned, regarding submitting the monthly bank statements. Other potential tax requirements. So as Steve mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, some chapters are required to file Form 1096 and associated Form 1099s for payments of over $600 to individuals, attorneys, and limited liability companies. So the general rule of thumb, always obtain that Form W-9 for a vendor, regardless of the payment amount, and before payment, as this will make your life easier when filing comes around in January for these applicable 1099s. Form 1099s are due January 31st, as Steve mentioned, and BDO will be reaching out as that deadline nears closer. Some chapters are required to file sales tax returns for food payments, and some chapter housing corporations must pay property taxes. Please reach out if this applies to your chapter as well. All right, our 2020 tax compliance timeline. A few key dates to put on your calendar. October 1st, that is the date the tax organizer due to BDO to ensure timely filing. Another plus, National will apply a $100 credit to each chapter that submits their completed organizer to BDO by October 1st. The chapter's tax return initial deadline is November 15th. And if you have not yet received a copy of the tax organizer we have been discussing, please let myself or National know, and we'll be happy to pass one along. And with that, open forum. With no additional questions, I do just want to reiterate, I'm glad everyone was able to attend today. I hope this discussion was very helpful. Upon completion of the tax organizer, please do send your Excel organizer to the stgchapters@bdo.com email. That is the email that we will utilize for all correspondence going forward. Again, if you have any questions during preparation, feel free to reach out to National or myself. We're happy to help and always here to assist. With that, I guess we're thankful that you guys were here, and we appreciate your attendance.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.